Good afternoon and welcome to Private Equity's Guide to CMMC. I'm Seth and I will be your moderator today. We have an outstanding lineup for you. In just 30 minutes, we're going to cover critical information that could impact your defense portfolio's investments and M&A. Our two expert panelists are Michael Gruden, who is the government contracts cybersecurity partner at Crowell Moring, and he routinely performs cyber diligence for corporate transactions. He's a former Pentagon IT acquisition branch chief who oversaw billions in DoD IT contracts. He's not only a CMMC registered practitioner, but also sits on the CMMC's cyber accreditation body's appeals board, which gives him unique insight into both cyber compliance strategies and the practical implementation. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks so much, Seth. Great to be here.
Yeah, we appreciate you. And Vince Petrecca, who is VP of Sales and Customer Success at Prevail. He's been here for 7 years and has helped, at this point, thousands of DIB companies on their journey to CMMC. Welcome, Vince.
Thanks a lot, Seth. Glad to be here.
Yeah, my pleasure. So here's our agenda. Michael will cover the CMMC Final Rule. It's 470 pages, so we appreciate you saving us some time on that one, Michael. We'll cover timeline and requirements, and then talk about how it impacts mergers and acquisitions, especially related to PE and VC firms. Then Vince will demonstrate how Prevail can help enable CMMC compliance across defense portfolios with a clear, proven, cost-effective solution. So with that, let's dive in. Michael, let's start with the fundamentals. Can you walk us through the CMMC timeline? Where are we today?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's been a lot of activity, I think, for anyone that's been sort of trying to follow and keep up with the CMMC progress kind of through various iterations of rulemaking. It's probably very confusing. I think it's even confusing to those of us that really kind of live and breathe this space and live in the CMMC ecosystem, if you will. But really where we are, last December was actually when the final rule for the CMMC program itself was codified. If you look at the graphic here, back in December of 24, 32 CFR was actually what formalized the CMMC program. And this was really important because what it did was it codified and formally finalized the CMMC program itself. And what that meant is that going forward, it actually sort of just created the CMMC program itself. It established it. And what it meant, though, is that then actual assessments could begin under the official program. Prior to that, companies were conducting assessments but more under sort of a voluntary basis. But through the finalization of the program, you now have those C3 PAOs, which are certified assessing officials that can actually assess companies' compliance with the underlying CMMC standards as they were defined within the assessment guides, scoping guides, and the related criteria. The other part that we're waiting for, though, is the finalization of the actual CMMC clause rule, as we refer to that. And you'll see that sort of further down to the right of our screen. But again, to that middle graphic there, those assessments have begun by C3POs. We saw those beginning around the January, February timeframe, and many companies that we counsel as well have also sort of engaged in those assessments since that finalization. But the point to look for right now is when that final rule for the CMMC clause will be finalized, because that will sort of kick off the official implementation of the CMMC program. If for any of you out there that have taken a look at the actual final rule for the CMMC program, it projects that actual phased implementation, and that in order for it to begin, the actual clause rule that I was referring to has to first be finalized. But I will mention, though, the one sort of nuance there that we're seeing is through the finalization of the program itself back in December, we're already seeing various iterations of government activity under the CMMC program itself. And what I mean by that is we're already seeing select DoD solicitations and RFPs, including CMMC requirements. We even internally have clients ourselves that have received inquiries from DoD contracting officers inquiring as to when a company actually will obtain their CMMC certificate under, again, current contracts. So all that to say, while we're waiting for this final rule to really robustly roll out the broader implementation of this, we're still seeing in select instances the DoD already looking to CMMC as a benchmark and a standard for contractor compliance with cybersecurity.
Wow, that's awesome. Thank you for laying that out, Michael. So I wanted to ask about enforcement mechanisms and some of the carrot stick elements. So it sounds like DoD is reaching out. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about the opportunities that CMMC presents, and then also what kind of any defense kind of portfolio companies or PE firms need to be aware of from a stick perspective.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think again, I like the point that you mentioned there, Seth, that again, CMMC itself does create many opportunities. It creates market opportunities for really any company that's wanting to more broadly avail its services and even products in various instances to the federal government. Because again, going forward, particularly with the DoD, they very clearly stated if you don't possess the CMMC certifications for future contract awards, then you will be entirely ineligible. I actually was a former contracting officer, like you were mentioning, Seth, and we have a paradigm referred to as go, no-go requirements. And again, this here, that CMMC certification would be that no-go requirement, meaning if you don't have the certificate, you're immediately precluded from the competitive range. You would not be considered for a contract award. And so again, when we look at market opportunity, if there's a specific target or entity that is actually wanting to either grow their federal market presence or continue down that path of sort of strengthening those ties and future business opportunities, the path to CMMC really is something worth investing in, because really if you don't go that way, if you don't kind of go with the trend with which these cyber requirements are going, then you'll be left out of future opportunities. However, the flip side of that is the risk that this presents for companies is again potential inadvertent non-compliance. And what I mean by that is, over the last decade, frankly, we've seen increased sort of focus from the Department of Defense with regards to various contractors that have not fully implemented their cybersecurity requirements. And while CMMC might be new to some, the underlying cybersecurity requirements themselves that sort of are taken from a different cyber standard, NIST Standard 171, that's been around for about a decade. And so what that means, though, is that, again, the government sort of has identified that many contractors within the defense industrial base have not fully implemented effectively the NIST security controls. And what we've seen by that over the last several years is that the DoD, in concert with the Department of Justice, have initiated the Civil Cyber Fraud Initiative out of the Department of Justice. And what we're seeing from that is enforcement actions where the government is actually going after contractors that have not fully implemented the security controls or misrepresented their certifications or their level of compliance. And what I mean by that is a prior cyber requirement under a separate clause required companies to self-assess their current compliance, upload that score into a system referred to as SPURS, the Supplier Performance Risk System. And with that, companies would upload a score, but what we've seen through various enforcement actions and actual investigations where we've represented companies under attorney-client privilege is that the government, through discovery, is obtaining unprivileged assessments from other external vendors for those companies and seeing a disconnect. What I mean by that is, a perfect score under that self-assessment would be 110. But we're seeing that, again, companies, or the government rather, is looking at those SPURS score self-assessments, then they're looking at those external reports and seeing, again, a disconnect. Some companies might have had 5 to 10 gaps or more, and then they're saying, well, you have here an external validation that you were not perfect. Get over here, you told the government that you were. And because of that, the government is bringing forth these settlements that actually are resulting in tens of millions of dollars for companies. And so when we're talking about due diligence under corporate transactions, cyber compliance or the lack thereof, I think is of critical importance because that can significantly affect the valuation of a company prior to acquisition, but also inform potential legal risks sort of following acquisition, where we have seen under certain transactions where companies did not carefully look at the cyber compliance of companies that were acquired, and then afterwards they either suffered a cyber incident, a data breach, or they were found to be non-compliant with various IT security requirements. And that can have significant ramifications for companies, both in terms of continuing their contracting activity, meaning that if you're found to be non-compliant, you could be suspended or debarred from future contracting opportunities. You may have to disclose those under future solicitations or proposals that you're providing to the government. So there's a myriad of reputational harm and damage that can be done for not fully vetting the compliance of any potential acquisition prior to that transaction.
Wow. Thank you, Michael. That's like you recapped 10 years of CMMC and DFARS in a few minutes as only you can. If I maybe I can just run it back to you and give me a little bit of leeway as a non-lawyer, but it sounds like these cybersecurity standards have been required for many years, almost a decade, but compliance has been inconsistent. And so the DoD kind of created CMMC to have these third-party assessments to validate that companies are doing what they said. And then they also have, the DOJ and some of these fraud initiatives to double check that as well, and perhaps add fines if necessary.
That's fun.
Okay, awesome. No, I appreciate you kind of walking us through that.
Yeah,
Um,
the other one I'd add to them, they're not sort of just like, $100 ticket fees. Like I have a couple at my desk that I need to pay off for those speed cams. But again, this really is, in all seriousness, these are not just sort of enforcement actions that are starting at $10 million, but we actually represented clients where actually the opening kind of amount for the fines were $100 million. So
Hmm.
these
wow.
are not insignificant, kind of just, oh, don't worry about it, we'll take care of that. These can have, you know, almost indescribable financial impact and business and operational harm to companies. But again, we're seeing a lot of them reach even $10 million. And again, I think we can all collectively agree that that's nothing to really, again, sort of, take a blind eye to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you mentioned, the DoD can come in and assess these, or perhaps as companies are bidding on new contracts, these can come up. Can you talk a little bit about the M&A trigger and that portion of it? When is a new assessment required? How does that impact deals, costs, timelines? I would love to hear your experience perspective on that.
Sure. I think this is something that anyone sort of in the M&A space should really be read into and appreciate that, again, under that final rule that was codified back in December, in various parts of the comment and response part of that final rule that was published, it actually discussed scenarios when a new assessment would need to be required. And specifically, the DoD stated if there was a significant change to the relevant assets that pertain to the assessment scope, meaning the network that was assessed prior under CMMC, that if there was a significant change to the architecture or to the system boundary, that would require a new CMMC assessment. But they didn't really stop there. They provided really helpful examples of potential assessment scopes. And one of those actually were expansions of networks or specifically mergers and acquisitions. And so this means that in the event of M&A activity that results in a significant architectural or boundary change to the contractor's previous assessment, the contractor would likely need to undergo a new CMMC assessment if they were holding either a level 2 or level 3 certifications. These changes would typically be more likely in an asset sale than a stock purchase, but the rule doesn't really make an explicit distinction one way or the other about the types of transactions.
Interesting. Thank you. Thank you for walking through that. That's awesome. Um, as we get into the actionable kind of implementation part of the webinar, you mentioned something interesting in our prep where you said you really recommend that these companies be prepared for the market opportunity and do it the right way, and really think about like building with intentionality. I'm curious if you could expand upon that here, and what does that look like for a portfolio company?
Definitely. I think, when I say sort of doing it the right way, I kind of use the euphemism that we can all recall kind of growing up where, we're either trying to do some project at home or, our parents asked us to do something or, you're out in the yard and your dad just like, just do it the right way. And you kind of know that sometimes you were creating that little shortcut because you might want to cut corners or finish a little bit sooner, or maybe not expend as much resources. So too is the same paradigm when we think about cybersecurity and IT infrastructure, where again, it can be tempting sometimes to want to sort of think, well, actually, how can we kind of live in the gray? How can we sort of just get by and just meet the baseline standards? But sometimes even when just meeting the baseline, we're really not fully implementing the controls and the requirements for the intent the way the government themselves had intended it. And so in terms of doing it the right way, what we're meaning by that is considering solutions where you're certain that your data is meeting the actual requisite cybersecurity standards, meaning do you have it in a secure enclave? Do you have your systems configured that, only individuals that have certain levels of access and need to have access to that data? Or is it carte blanche where anyone can touch it at any point in time? Do you have effective logging to demonstrate who did or didn't access that data? If you were going to have a cyber incident, do you know actually how to respond to that quickly? Do you have your outside counsel? Do you have an actionable incident response plan? Which again, these are all underlying requirements of CMMC and under the foundational NIST security controls. And so what we're meaning by that is, again, thinking through and making sure that you have the right team, that you have the right resources to make you successful, and not only just to sort of keep you out of trouble, but to make you successful for your ultimate business ventures.
That's awesome. And if we were to up level that one to the private equity or I guess any kind of VC or ownership group, what would you say to them about their kind of portfolio and their responsibility and how they should be managing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think with the private equity clients that we've counseled in the past, we appreciate that it's kind of a fast environment, right? There's a lot going on. There's a sort of a lot at stake, and there's a lot of moving parts that are happening rapidly. And I think with that, some of the risk can be that sometimes we're moving so quick that we don't fully evaluate the potential risk. And when I say that, I mean both sort of internally for the internal PE firm, but also when we're looking at external targets. And I think particularly when looking at external targets, really being sober-minded at understanding and taking a very careful lens of looking at the potential target sort of internal compliance, looking at their documentation, looking at their infrastructure, looking at the sophistication that's sort of at play within their operations, and then having that inform whether or not that same target would actually still operate independently or if it would be absorbed by the private equity company. Those types of details, I think, matter in terms of sort of how you're thinking longer term, but don't sort of just run with something just because it's almost an emotional kind of thing, right? Even if we think about sometimes in M&A, it can almost be like speed dating. You're like, oh, I really like this person. This seems like a great opportunity. You're kind of just going down the path, but it really might not be the best thing. So too is the case here, kind of when we're talking about kind of legal risk, when we're thinking about these, acquisitions and transactions, being mindful of the potential risks, and again, being very clear-eyed and taking the time to clearly understand what's at stake, knowing the regulated data, knowing the systems and network at stake, and seeing how they're currently being configured, and if they're supporting documentation that is crisply and accurately meeting those requirements.
I imagine that may like elongate some of the timelines. I'm curious if, in your experience, how has CMMC or these similar frameworks like impacted deals, valuations, due diligence? Be curious your experience in that.
I would say a lot. Again, if this is not that you're planning at the forefront, if you're sort of just finding these things out along the way, it can significantly add to the timeline with regards to a deal. It can sort of slow down negotiations or various markups under purchase agreements. Because again, all these details and nuances matter. And I can think through various use cases in the past of other deals where we were doing cyber diligence where maybe it wasn't readily apparent what type of regulated data that the target possessed or where that data was stored. And maybe they didn't even know. And so we were kind of feeling around and frankly having to do kind of almost like a month-long assessment that we would do for another client, real time, in the weeds and then in the midst of a transaction. And I think we could all sort of appreciate that that's going to significantly slow things down and create frustrations. But again, back to sort of doing it the right way, those things significantly matter because again, if a company was acquiring another entity that had regulated data that was, again, not on a compliant network, not only would that have significant financial repercussions, but it could have significant business and legal impact. And so again, the more that you can sort of do that and obtain that information on the forefront, the more that you're prepared and that you can kind of ideally stick to a closer schedule than you would have, anticipated at the start of that engagement.
I wish you could speak to every defense company like one-on-one, Michael, and just share this message.
I'm here for it. So yeah.
No, we appreciate that. Before we move to solutions and how Prevail can help, but is there anything else you'd want to share or give advice to for either PE firms or any contractors who may be listening on how to be proactive versus reactive in terms of achieving CMMC?
Sure. I mean, I think the main takeaway is, again, don't just sort of take something sort of like an off-the-shelf, out-the-box solution, making sure that kind of what you have, A, meets the requisite quality, but making sure too that your underlying infrastructure and documentation is tailored and complete and accurate. Again, speaking from the vantage point of looking at various deals and diligence, you'd be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't be surprised. Many of companies like pre-acquisition or the targets are scrambling to pull stuff together to sort of look like their house is in order, right? Or if you think about right now, this time of year, I think we're seeing a lot of home sales and, you're seeing people, when you're doing those home tours, everything sort of tucked away in the closets and looks pristine and perfect. So too is the same for compliance for target companies. But with what we see though often are sort of boilerplate solutions where they're sort of just providing kind of written documents that are very sterile, that are very clearly sort of just, control F, copy paste, sort of changing names of companies, but don't really affect, or articulate how a company has implemented their controls. They don't have policies that are innate to their organization, nor do they lack process or have process in place that are, again, sort of tailored to their business operations. Those are the things that the government is looking for. And again, any of those potential gaps is where it's creating that legal risk. So again, in terms of how to be proactive, it would be really being mindful of understanding your regulated data, knowing what type of environment it can be stored in, having written policies that very carefully and clearly delineate your internal processes and don't rely exclusively on those external services, but make sure that you have a tailored and bespoke kind of compliance package, and making sure if you're going to pressure test that, pressure test it under attorney-client privilege. Because again, for all those reasons that I was mentioning earlier, with the Civil Cyber Fraud Initiative, if you can cloak that in attorney-client privilege, meaning if you have an outside firm either conduct those assessments or oversee and conduct those through an external third party under privilege, none of that is discoverable. So you're kind of insulating your company or your target from that potential risk, and that would sort of only add to that.
Yeah, I agree, Michael. I mean, the documentation challenge with NIST CMMC is real.
Yeah.
And many folks come in assuming this is a technology challenge. We just need to add some technology and we'll be okay. And they find that adding this technology can often typically be actually the quicker part, the easier part of this. And that really creating, developing, finalizing the documentation, hundreds of pages that are required to achieve this certification status is the longer pole. And agree that it needs to be done correctly and with the right, in partnership with the right team to make it happen.
Completely agree. And the last point I'll add to, with regards to that, the policies themselves are integral to achieving CMMC certification because, again, to sort of meet every individual control under CMMC, you have to demonstrate sort of two pieces of evidence or artifacts, as the CMMC refers to it, one of which is often sort of a policy or a process. So if you don't have a very, very tailored policies, then you may likely not be able to fully demonstrate that how you went into those controls.
That's awesome. That's awesome advice and recommendations, Michael. We appreciate you and everything you're doing.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Yeah, Vince, maybe you could take the baton here and talk through some of the specific challenges you may be hearing from the companies you're talking to and walk us through Prevail's solution.
Yeah, let me just provide some examples. I mean, PE funded firms out there often need to be able to get into this CMMC game quickly, less expensively than some larger companies, organizations that have been in the defense industrial base for years. And the Prevail is a great fit for that. So I'd like to convey how we can help make this a quicker path to success for those PE type funded firms. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. Again, you'll see, one of the things about NIST CMMC, and you're going to make some decisions about working with technology partners, about working with folks who are going to help you with your documentation. Very important to be working with someone that has a proven solution here. There's many folks who are part of what I call the land grab in the CMMC space. Many people want to build a business here. Really important, Prevail has many of our customers have gotten 110 out of 110 on their CMMC certification assessments. That is the proof. Work with companies that have done that for their clients, and that way you can be sure that you're on the right path. Okay, so Prevail really has a three-pronged approach of value proposition. You do need, as Michael mentioned, a DFARS compliant repository for any CUI that you're handling internally. If you already have controlled unclassified information, you should have that today. Many do not have that today, but you should have that today. That's part of what you've agreed to in your DFARS 7012 contract. Prevail has that. So operating within the AWS GovCloud, which is FedRAMP High Impact, we're going to support all of the DFARS 7012 requirements around incident reporting and media preservation. That's sometimes known as DFARS clauses C through G. We meet this FedRAMP certification requirements. We're FIPS 140-2 validated in terms of the algorithms that we employ. That means NIST has reviewed our algorithms and made sure that our encryption modules meet the requirements. On top of this, we also meet all the requirements around ITAR, which is export controlled content as defined by the State Department. So you may find that there's an overlap between ITAR content you have, CUI content you have. Prevail can cover all of that. And also very important, as we're talking about the complexity of meeting these controls, there are 110 cyber controls, and Prevail is going to provide partial, substantial, or inherited support for 102 of those 110. So that's really a big step forward in terms of being able to say we help, we address these requirements as they're laid out by the DoD. That's the platform side. Again, we can have that up and running for an organization in just a few days. We've done thousands of them, so it's fairly quick and painless for most of our customers. The documentation challenge is substantial. This will be hundreds. If you're lucky, it'll be hundreds of pages. It could be more than hundreds, but many pages of documentation that describe your system security plan. And the system security plan, think of it as what you're doing to meet these cyber controls. These standard operating procedures are the how you do it. And that's where there's a lot of detail. Exactly how do you do this in your business? The SOP should be written as if you brought a new person in and said you're responsible for meeting these controls, they could read your standard operating procedures and say, okay, I can learn how to do this, and then I'll meet the controls by following these SOPs. Prevail accelerates your progress in this area. We have a full pre-filled set of these SSP and SOPs for kind of a standard defense industrial base customer, a relatively small, medium-sized business. And as Michael said, you will need to customize these. You'll need to review them. You'll need to make sure if they don't fit your business as is, that you customize them so that they meet the way your customer transacts a business involving controlled and classified information. The Compliance Accelerator includes all that, plus a whole bunch of instructional videos that include C3PAO assessors insights into exactly what you should be focused on to ensure you're going down the right path for CMMC compliance. There's detailed content in here to address all 110 of the 110 controls. At some point, everyone's going to need a CMMC assessor, a C3PAO. Good news is you can choose your own. And so when you choose one, you'll want to choose one of Prevail's preferred partners who's familiar with the Prevail model, our documentation, our encryption, etc. That will speed your process, streamline the assessment process. In addition, we've got registered practitioners, those are the consultants in the CMMC space, and managed service providers who we can bring to bear on your specific requirements. We have hundreds of those partners. We know exactly what they do best, where they're located, of course, etc., and we can bring them to bear on your specific solutions if and when you need assistance. So the Prevail value proposition in a nutshell, the system itself, easy to deploy and use. We're going to show you how it really fits into regular business processes. Our encrypted email can be used right out of your standard Outlook interface. Your encrypted files can be stored right in File Explorer. Proven compliance. Now over 1,800 enterprise customers in the defense contractor space. A good number of them either already with CMMC assessment scores of 110 or on the way to those assessment scores. And saving most of our customers, we estimate at least 75% versus alternatives. And that includes the fact that with Prevail, you can set up an enclave. Only those users who need to handle this sensitive content need to be included in your compliance boundary. You can leverage our Compliance Accelerator, and our licenses themselves tend to be significantly cheaper than other alternatives that are out there in the market. Prevail itself will cover your standard use case that you would have internally for managing this type of content. Prevail Drive is going to be your file repository, where you keep the content, how you share it internally or share it with third parties. Prevail Email is going to enable you to communicate seamlessly with encrypted email that meets the compliance requirements. We've got mobile access covered with iOS and Android. We've got browser-based views, and we have those integrations with mail clients and file systems. Just to be clear on how this works, another nice aspect with Prevail is you don't have to mess it all with your current productivity solution. Your standard email, your standard SharePoint, or whatever you're using today with Microsoft products or Google Workspace is fine. Continue to use that for what you do day to day. Prevail is going to serve as your enclave, your secure vault for the CUI, and we're going to store all that fully encrypted per the standards in the AWS Gov Cloud. We'll put a small application on each of your user devices that are included in your compliance boundary. That's going to do the encryption and decryption right at the device level. It's going to protect all your content whenever it leaves that device. And then inside, of course, that software will also have the proxies in it so we can present the content to you in a very digestible format. Because of this separation in the Prevail environment, you get a fully zero trust type of situation. What does zero trust mean? It means no one who isn't the people who've been shared the content can ever see that content. Zero trust to me means that even Prevail, even our best software engineers can't go in and decrypt anything in your system. If our own engineers can't get to it, it's very challenging for an external attacker to get there. So we're designed completely around protecting your data from start to finish. End-to-end encryption is what we use for everything, not just encryption at rest and encryption in transit. End-to-end encryption is better, more secure. We don't use passwords that can be guessed or stolen, etc. We're going to authenticate via cryptographic keys that are only located on your user devices that are authorized for those users. No central point of attack. Even admins in an organization can't see all the content for the organization. If they need to go see someone's stuff, that needs to be approved by at least one other individual in the organization. And finally, we've got a trusted community capability where your team can only share this sensitive content with externally vetted companies or individuals that have their domains or email addresses whitelisted in our trusted community list for your company. As a result, now, as I mentioned before, almost 2,000 customers in this space. We really know how to help companies become CMMC compliant. Our model works very well. We're well known in the DoD space. So really happy to help with any organizations under your purview to help you get to success in this area.
Thank you so much, Vince. I appreciate it. I know we're right up here on time. If people do have questions, please feel free to reach out to sales@prevail.com and mgruden@crowell.com. Vince, Michael, thank you so much for your time, expertise. We appreciate you.
Thanks for having us.
You bet. Thanks, Seth. Thanks, Michael.